Turn the headphones up.
Hey, oh,
Yeah. Well, I guess you can call me a dreamer,
hey,
but I do believe
oh,
that things will change.
oh,
We've been through the storm.
yeah,
We've gone through the valley.
oh,
There's nowhere else to go but up.
we shall overcome.
We will
We shall
overcome.
overcome. We shall overcome. Someday.
Now, if you believe that,
Someday.
just help me sing it.
We shall overcome. We shall
overcome.
We shall overcome.
We shall overcome racism,
We shall overcome.
hatred,
Someday.
jealousy. Now, even if you don't believe it, help me say this.
We'll walk hand in hand.
I believe that.
We'll walk hand in hand.
I already see it.
We'll walk hand in hand.
Yeah.
Someday.
See, it don't matter what color you are, where you come from.
We'll walk hand in hand.
You're my brother.
We'll walk hand in hand.
You're my sister, my friend.
We'll walk hand in hand.
Yeah.
Someday.
I really like this part right here. Freedom.
We will all be free. We will all be free. We will all be free.
I believe it and I receive it today.
We will all be free.
Freedom.
Someday.
Now just help me say it one more time if you believe that. We will all be free.
We will all be free.
Free from our father's sins. Free from our own sins. Free from racism, from jealousy, from hatred.
We'll all be free.
Someday.
Someday.
Let's take it to the chorus. Oh, deep in my heart.
Deep in my heart.
I do believe
I do believe
that
we shall overcome.
yes,
Someday.
let it be today.
Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
Hello again. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from around the world and North America and everywhere else. Can't believe this is our 7th episode. And again, we're going to present you with another group of highly talented next generation. And this is such a powerful platform that I've been talking about. I mean, this is a great way to bring your leadership, your unity, your network. And today's topic is actually giving me goosebumps. I mean, this is one of the greatest topics. We're going to talk about politics, American politics, world politics, and the community. So basically, you know, our next generation is our future, as you all know, and they have a voice, and they can make a big difference and keep our community, country, and world a better place to live. So please support them. And also our election is coming in North America. And this couldn't have been a better time to discuss about this and, you know, get them involved. And I was amazed to see the involvement, the amount of, you know, participation from our next generation. And please, let's educate each other and make the right decision for us in November. And so let's hear what they have to say. You know, they're really highly talented group of people. And this week, actually, along with BEST, which is Bangladeshi Entrepreneur Society of Talent, it's my pleasure to announce that Drupad, it's one of the greatest cultural organization in the Washington, D.C. metro. Drupad has joined force this team and supported us to put together this fantastic program. And with that, first, I like to introduce you. And as you all know, Drupad's founder and the director, Mr. Hiran Chaudhary. So let me just bring him on stage to, see him give us a few words. Hello, Hiran Bhai, how
Hello,
are you?
Jim. Fine. Good morning, Faisal, and all of you. First, myself and Drupad would like to thank you and your team for inviting us. And
Thank
I
you.
followed your show, and all these young kids were just unbelievably good. And I thought that we should also get involved. And mostly as you are involved in all your younger generation, I think we should do the same thing. And that's the reason I'm here today.
Thank you so much, Hiran Bhai, for your support. And again, you have been doing a lot of good work. And every Sunday we have a cultural show, and we're raising funds and distributing to the needy people around the world. So thank you again, and thanks for all your support.
Yeah. Okay. So let me say a few words. I think we have to go a little bit in history because that carries a lot of significance and why you are here today. If I can say, most of our parents and grandparents were born in British India, as all of you know. That is before 1947, when we got the independence from British. We became Pakistan. We were East Pakistan, and then we had West Pakistan on the other side, 1,000 miles away. And till 40 years, we were actually ruled by West Pakistan. We had the most percentage of the population. 75% of all government officials were from West Pakistan. 95% of army were from West Pakistan. All the industries will belong to West Pakistanis. So Bangladesh or East Pakistan was like a market, and we did not have rights. Mostly, most of our leaders, when they raised their voices, like Hamid Khan Fashani, Sohrawardi, and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, were thrown in jail. So what happened? It was the students. The upheaval that started in the 68, 69 was done mostly spearheaded by the students, by young people like you who are here today. And all of you know that what happened later on was our rights, or even if we owned the elections, we were not given the right to rule. And so the army fell on us, and mostly the violence or 1971 Bangladesh was born. And why do I say that today? Because I'm here today, and most of you who are here today is because of Bangladesh was born. Because during the days of Pakistan, people from East Pakistan were not even given passports. So very few people, like the government officials, were given passport. The passport offices were 1,000 miles away in West Pakistan. The scholarships that came here from the government or from European countries and from America were given to students from West Pakistan. Few of the talented Bangladeshi students who came to here in the States were actually on their own. They just applied. They were so talented, the universities got them. So why I'm telling you this? If Bangladesh was not born, we would not be able to come here. We'd be under the Pakistanis. We'd be ruled there, and we don't haven't got a passport. Now we are here. We are here. We call ourselves the first generation Bangladeshis. You are here because you are born here. And in Bangladesh, our parents told us, "Hey, you have to be a doctor or an engineer. Nothing else matters." Well, we did that. Well, but even if we did that, most of us who did that, all of us joined the upheavals, joined the processions, joined even the liberation war. We are here today because of the sacrifice of this community. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. And if you take some statistics, in when the elections happened, 80% of Bangladeshis vote for the elections. In America, till 2016, when Obama was elected president, most of the percentage of people voting was less than 50%. During Obama time, it was 51%. Remember that day. It again fell down later on. So what we have to do is we have to get involved. If we can raise this voting more, if we get involved in the politics of this country, I'm sure we are going to go somewhere where we need to be. Because there was a quote from Plato, the Greek philosopher, 428 BC, and what he said was, if you do not take an interest in the affairs of the government, then you are doomed to live under the rule of fools. And I think that's what's happening. So what I tell you is, We made the same mistake. We told our kids to go and be engineers, lawyers, doctors. We did not tell them to get involved in the affairs of the country. We are not going to make the same mistakes again. We have to get involved. All of you have to get involved. Your children have to get involved. If you don't have a future here. So
That's
again,
right. Absolutely.
I urge you, all of you, get involved, get people to go out and vote. If you can convince 10 of your friends, those 10 of your friends can convince other 10, get the percentage of voting as much as possible. Get involved in the affairs of your country. This is your country now. This is my country and all of our country. So get involved.
Excellent. Very well said. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Hiran Chaudhary. I couldn't agree with you more. It's time, and you'll be amazed by the discussion and the amount of content and the caliber that we're bringing in right now. So, thank you again. Let's both go backstage and then bring our moderator and get the program started. And thank you again for all your support. And
Thank you.
Yeah, take care. Okay, so let's bring in our moderator, Zaraf Shah and Farhana. Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Okay, good. So let me go in the backstage and then you guys get started and bring our superstars who will be talking about politics and the community and the world. Okay, and with that, please go ahead and get started, and I'm going to bring everybody on stage.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for that opening speech. It's just amazing to know that, there's just so much responsibility we have. And today, I think it's the time that we can take it up and talk about it. So good afternoon, friends. It's our 7th episode of Best Talks, and I'm Farhana Zaman Mo. Joining me would be for Zaraf Shah Ahmed, my co-host today. So before we get to the topic, I just wanted to say a little bit about BEST, which is about working and collaborating with talented individuals like you to create a networking bridge which can foster effective communication and relationships. It is also about talking, and raising awareness, discussing issues which affect our life the most. And today's one, I guess, is about American politics, because we live here and we own it. And, it's just about time we have a bigger discussion about what this means to each of us. As I recall, in the beginning of 2020, election 2020 rallies, nominations and speeches, election campaigns were in full swing. Suddenly, this pandemic caused a setback in this whole election feat. And during this time, the entire nation listened to President Trump and how his leadership could protect this nation from COVID-19. As and when he spoke from the Rose Garden, a rigmarole of speculations, debates, media commentaries flooded the TV channels. And to make sense of all of this, it's just not been easy. We have just had so much to hear. But I think how we think, we have not communicated to each other. American politics and its role in the COVID-19 pandemic, in the death of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and its own little fight, or actually long fight, between what Democrats and Republicans want. These are all the things that we would discuss with the panelists today. So keep tuned. Before I begin, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. So we have with us Junaid Mahmood, Aditi Chaudhary, Zareen Subha Imdad, Mishu Tasneem, Suha Khandakar, and Shaila Hassan. Thank you so much for being part of this today. And everything is assured. I know you guys are brilliant, but this is going to be one of those shows, where we are going to be talking about a bigger perspective, the place where we stay. So I would like to start with Junaid first. Again, thank you, Junaid, for coming in today and talking to us. You're a rising senior at Colgate University in New York, and you're majoring in economics and international relations. So, and you would also be interning with EY as technology business consultant, right? I mean, and congratulations, because COVID-19. I'm just glad that we're still continuing to get something to do, because I mean, COVID-19 has been just so negative. So, Junaid, I wanted to ask you that even though COVID-19 has severely impacted the world on a global scale and is, of course, a public health issue, what does it mean when we say that Americans have essentially politicized this problem?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of evidence showing that Americans have politicized the issue of COVID-19. There's surveys out there that show when asked whether you are extremely concerned about the virus, Democrats will say 60% of the time that they are concerned versus Republicans who will only say 12% of the time that they're extremely concerned. So this definitely is an issue. It raises the question as to whether Democrats and Republicans will ever see eye to eye on anything, because if something so universal as a coronavirus can be politicized, then what is the middle ground? What is the common ground? But the more pressing issue with this polarization of COVID-19 is how it is like shaping the policies that our leaders are making. As far as why COVID-19 has become so polarized, I blame a number of sources. I think the problem comes from both sides. I blame President Trump for claiming at the onset of the pandemic that the coronavirus was just a hoax created by the Democrats. I blame Joe Biden for trying so hard to leverage the coronavirus in his campaign. I blame the media for spending so much time scrutinizing and criticizing the president's response instead of actually reporting on the number and the day-to-day evolution of the pandemic. But the fact is that the coronavirus is truly novel. That's why it's called a novel coronavirus. And neither Democrats or Republicans have ever dealt with something of this nature. So it's really not fair to criticize either side. In terms of what we can do going forward, I think that the conversation around coronavirus needs to be purely scientific, and it just needs to be focused on the numbers and data. I think that reopening panels need to be comprised strictly of scientists and not politicians. Currently, as it stands, Trump's reopening team consists of only one member with a PhD, which just seems flawed. And if we want to navigate successfully without a vaccine, like other countries are doing right now, such as Spain and South Korea, then regulations can't be taken personally, and they can't be taken as an attack to your personality. The fact that masks are being seen as an issue of an infringement on personal rights by the state government is it's absurd. And the fact is, like, if we want to navigate this pandemic without a vaccine successfully, then masks need to be mandated on a universal level, and it has to be seen as a purely scientific decision.
I mean, yes, you're right about it. And when you say that, between Democrats and Republicans and the way they've been running their campaigns, basically they always famously say that they disagree, even if they agree about it. So has there been anything while this entire time that you felt at any point that there's just one thing these guys did right that actually worked for the best of the country, and even though it was politically driven, but it did work for good?
Well, I agree with all the insight that Dr. Anthony Fauci has been given on this issue. I think that at the start of the pandemic, he was really the leading voice, and politicians took a step aside. So I will agree with that. In terms of using that for political gain, we are seeing that now, where Fauci is being brought in on different news sources and being used as a political tool in a sense. But I agree with all the voice that he was given at the start of the pandemic.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you so much. All right, so I would want to move to Aditi next. Aditi, you're currently working as a grade level secretary at Loudoun County Public Schools, and you will be graduating from George Mason University this December with a Master's of Education in School Counseling. Again, good luck and congratulations. So, you also coach middle school hip hop dance team. So you have a lot on your plate going on. Aditi, what do you consider is the importance of representation in political offices? In light of American politics, is this a problem with this restructuring of the way the system is, or is it more about the individuals that are able to obtain offices?
Okay.
First, thank you. And yes, I'll start off first talking about representation. So if there's one thing that I've learned from being an active member of multiple communities, whether it's my school community, the Bengali community, the dance community, it's that in order to effectively lead a community, you must both understand and address the needs and requests of that specific community. So that understanding comes from representation. A politician that has either grown up in the community they wish to represent or that has some sort of established roots in that community, in my opinion, is most qualified because they've experienced firsthand what their community needs. However, when we're talking about identity and minorities, it's easy for a privileged upper class individual to run for office where they're able to fund their own campaign, whereas other individuals from minority groups who need to rely solely on funding for their campaigns lack those essential resources to run and therefore face more obstacles. So I can touch a little bit more on identity and representation. So, depending on the location, each community has sub-communities. For example, the Hispanic community, the South Asian community, the Black community, LGBT community, those living in poverty. And each of these sub-communities have more niche communities, such as, the Bengali community, the Puerto Rican, the transgender, the Black transgender community. And we tend to see a lot of intersection between these communities as well. In terms of demographic representation, we've been doing better. Right now there's a record 131 women that serve in the 116th Congress. There's 105 women in the House. There's congresswomen and men such as Alexia Ocasio-Cortez, who's a Hispanic American woman representing parts of the Bronx and Queens in New York, and she actually used to work as a waitress. Ilhan Omar, who's the first Muslim American woman elected to Congress, and she's a naturalized citizen who fled Somalia. Rohit Khanna, he's from California. He's been representing California's 17th congressional district since 2017. He was born in Philly. And most of these individuals that I've been naming, they refuse funds from political action committees. So, which means their platforms are more genuinely based towards the interests of their constituents. So, although the structure of our government was based on separation of power and checks and balances, if you don't have the people that can accurately and genuinely represent the people that they're leading, what is the point of democracy?
Exactly. And that really well said, Aditi. Also the fact that, we have this new shift or this new paradigm where we have people come in and they're accepting these funds from other communities other than really the political ones. I mean, I think that speaks volumes about, the kind of work they're trying to do and the kind of message they're trying to give out. And I'm just glad that, these people are actually new generation. They are of a different generation from the ones from their descendants, which is definitely promising to hear. And thank you for bringing that up. So thank you, Aditi. Moving on, my next question is for Zareen. You're an avid book reader, and that's something inspires me. I'm a bookworm too. You recently graduated from the University of Mary Washington with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science. Earlier this year, you actually worked for a session aide for Virginia Delegate Sam Russell, and currently are working as the outreach coordinator and grant writer for Bidish Foundation. So, Zareen, since your area of expertise is on policy research, so I think this is a much more apt question for you. Political awareness has immensely grown over the recent decade in America. People are much more aware. So, but these efforts and energy that has largely been focused on domestic issues more, actually. So I wanted to ask you, what is the importance of the American public officers to seriously consider the policies or impacts of U.S. foreign affairs?
So first, I believe that with a very globalized and interconnected world, it's very difficult not to focus on foreign affairs alongside domestic issues. And because the world is so interconnected on many levels, the world relies on each other, whether that's trade, And so, because of that, the US cannot live in a bubble, and therefore it can't isolate themselves. Especially as you see, a lot of younger American voters are voicing that the US must decrease their involvement in foreign relations. And personally, I believe that our country simply can't do that because there are other factors at play. For instance, foreign affairs and foreign relations doesn't just mean diplomatic ties, it also means economic ties. And the United States exports and imports a lot of items in various economic sectors from various different countries. And so therefore, it's crucial for the American people and the public officials to take these into consideration because foreign policies affect Americans in their daily lives and vice versa. Domestic politics and foreign affairs are more interconnected than most might think, and Americans have more influence in foreign policy than they think than they believe. And so all politics have a planned and unplanned consequences, and this includes foreign diplomatic ties, humanitarian crises, trade deals, and economics. And I would say that another example would be trade sanctions and trade deals. They are either incentives or they're punishments on respective countries. Economic ties and trade deals are used to push a country's plan forward, whether that is as a humanitarian crisis or for their own country's benefit. And another example would be US economic sanctions against Myanmar's military when the Rohingya genocide occurred. The United States put pressure on the Myanmar military, by threatening with economic sanctions so that they would be more inclined to end the violence that they inflicted. And then besides that, the United States also provides millions of dollars in economic aid to numerous different developing and recently developed countries. And so it's very hard not to focus on foreign policy because the US is so involved everywhere in the world.
Yeah, that's true. They're very involved.
Yeah.
I mean, so, considering this whole thing, I know that COVID-19 has been a situation that our country or globally, no country has been prepared for. What kind of foreign policy do you think was implemented or should be implemented to kind of combat something so globally declared a public health issue? Because I know that WHO is being on the forefront trying to communicate what the problem is, but I don't necessarily think that there has been a policy in place which has or anything that is globally discussed when it came to COVID-19, at least in the very beginning. But could you tell us a little more about that?
Unfortunately, I don't have all of that information, but I do agree with you. I think a lot of different countries, did not prepare well enough for this, or they thought that the virus wouldn't catch up to them, it wouldn't spread as much. And I will say, in terms of foreign policy, I'm unsure of what other countries could be doing, but I know recently in South Korea, they had a spike, but before South Korea did a really well, they implemented their policies very well in terms of handling COVID-19. I don't necessarily remember the specifics, but I do remember that they did really well, and other countries, they prepared ahead of time. They got all the testing kits. They have a lot more benefits for people that are unable to work at this time. They provided food for like a social welfare for all of their citizens in the cities and the countryside, that they prepped very well to handle the situation, whereas I think the US didn't do that.
And I think over here, I want to say that foreign policy should prevail because now that it's a public issue, even though every country is doing their bit, I guess, it's time that we talk foreign policies here for situations like this. Thank you so much, Zareen. That was very informative. So my next question is from Mishu, sorry. So you graduated in electrical engineering and you're currently working for the federal government in the healthcare space. And that's an intersection of technology and policy. So Mishu, in your view, I want to know, what you think about the federal government versus the state government. It's always the big question because we just have so many authorities in power, and they keep deciding who wants to do what. So, given the size and population of our country, and especially with the response that both federal and the state government had towards the pandemic, what you think was the more effective way of governing the country today?
So there really is no right answer to that. I think the answer is a hybridized answer, and we're seeing the importance of the balance in powers more than ever right now with the COVID response. You see the federal government reacting in a certain way, and then you see certain state governors or local mayors saying, absolutely not, that idea is bonkers. We're going to do our own thing, and using their own powers and exercising their powers. So I think for like the average citizen, what is really important to understand is not to just rely on what the media is saying about the federal government. Like I myself am guilty of this as well. Like I was never really informed until I like started working in the federal place of like how much the local government, both like city locality as well as my state locality, like matters in my life. And again, that is a place that I could get like this far in because of like my privilege. I am not, you know, generally affected by policies on welfare checks or unemployment benefits, SNAP, like food credits, like that. And so I think what's really important for all of us to actually be able to answer that question is it is going to be a mixed answer, right? The United States is a union of 50 different states and 6 territories. So it's never going to be 100% at federal level. But also like understanding the economics and the where the money is coming and going to is super, super important. There will be often times where the federal government will put out a policy and say that the states have power to do something, but in reality, the states are being paid 90 cents to the dollar for their ideas. So even though the federal government is saying, state, you do your own thing, they hold 90 cents back, because if the state doesn't comply with that. So I think following the money is very, very important. So as you all consider careers in policy or technology, I think that is something very, very important to follow. The other thing to think about there is, again, like having sort of like a purist background in simply engineering, like Hironuncle was mentioning, you just don't think about the exploration of like the intersection between where like policy meets technology. I happen to fortunately like accidentally stumble upon this, but as like introduce a more digitally native generation into the workforce, into interactions with the government, right? I can't say that any of us enjoys going to the DMV, whether you're 60 years old or you're 19 years old, right?
Completely agree with you on that.
Right, but a 19-year-old expects to swipe a couple of times and click a few things and have a license delivered. Whereas somebody who's older might be like, all right, fine, I'll take an afternoon off and I'll get my new credit card. So as the new generation comes in to power, we have consumer power, we have voting power, we have building power, right? Like we are impatient and like lean into that impatience to like really drive at like the powers that your state and local governments have versus what the federal governments have. I think we have created this media storm of like, well, the federal government screwed up, but we have all of this power at our local levels that we can exercise.
That's impressive, actually, saying that, you know, our state government actually has the power to influence ideas, because I think that is where we start from first. But just also because, you know, our viewers would want to know that when we say that a state government is able to exercise on certain powers, like where do you think we need to talk first? Because I think, of course, we do talk, but it also needs to be heard at a good level. So, I mean, when you talk about state government, I would want to know, what is that thing, or how do we start talking to them if we have to?
There's a lot of mechanisms. This is something that I recently, I am embarrassed to say that, very recently started looking at state websites. I've never really done my own inventory and research into this. Some states are actually very good and have email addresses, send them emails. You'd be surprised if you're one of 6 emails, they have to respond to you.
Oh, okay.
Send them emails. There's a lot of states that right now are adopting a digital services team. So if you look at Colorado, New York, even certain cities, and so as civic tech also to go, and there's this groundswell movement from programs like Code for America that kind of find this intersection between government services and being able to bring that technology to the people, and building policy that a human being can relate to, and putting the human being at the center of building policy. Because so many times policy is written, not so many times, probably 99% of the time, policy is written by people who have the privilege and the power to sit in a room with no financial burdens, a comfortable meeting place where they decide on policy, but they don't get to see what the pain is like. So if you know your neighbor is struggling with balancing 3 jobs and unemployment and lack of health care, send an email off to your local state government. Find your state.gov site, send an email. Like I said, a lot of states are starting to see this, and there is a groundswell movement. California does a fantastic job with the COVID-19 response. A lot of states have said we're going to take contact tracing into our own hands because the federal government is not providing enough for us. And again, their IT dollars are very limited in budget. I was talking to the state of Austin. The maximum that they can pay their state employees.
Hello?
Somebody, sorry,
No worries.
did I just freeze?
No worries.
So again, follow the menu, understand that you might have to take a salary cut to be involved in a state and local government, but go after those jobs. That's where there will always be a voice in the room, and it could be a voice of power or it could be a voice of evil, and you get to decide that. So I would definitely recommend not only get involved by sending emails and communicating with your local government or political appointees, but also work for the government. Right now, only 6% of federal employees are under the age of 30. So what's going to happen when 43% of the people that are over 60 retire? We're going to have this vacuum, not only a vacuum of staff, but also a vacuum of tech talent. And when I say tech talent, everybody in this room right now has tech talent because we're all native to technology. You don't have to be an engineer to be a technologist anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you for that insight. I mean, wow, that stats actually tells that, there's just more and more of us who needs to think about going that direction. And that's amazing that, there's just so much available. It's just that probably we're so busy becoming the regular things in life, like doctors and engineers, that we haven't seen that path. But that is something that we can do. We can change. So while we talk over here, I guess you all have to decide what you want to do next. All right. Thank you so much, Mishu. So coming next, I want to talk to Suha. Suha, you're currently working as regional finance assistant at the DCC. You got started working in politics, and you previously worked for as a field organizer for Delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy. Soon after she won the election, you worked as a deputy legislative aide for her during the 2018 General Assembly session. So, Mishu, I have a burning question for you. How has social media impacted this current political climate, especially in the light of COVID-19 and otherwise? And, what are the implications of technology for politics in general? I think you want to answer the first question, more about, what media has done here.
Yeah. So my name is Suha. I want to, explain to some folks what the DCCC is, because a lot of folks don't know, but basically the DCCC is the campaign arm for the House members of the Democratic Party. And so I think social media has impacted the political scene in that it's made it a lot more accessible to a lot of people. Kind of like what Mishu was saying is it's really important for people to be engaged with their federal officials or state level officials or local officials. And social media has made that a lot more accessible. So like one thing that's really nice to see is like a lot of social media posts about Black Lives Matter and all these like protests and how they can engage. And then another thing too, the DCCC has set up a virtual action center, and a lot of campaigns are doing this now where they set up phone banking for folks, which you can do like virtually online. So what is phone banking? It's basically you call your neighbors and you tell them, hey, this person is running in your district for whatever position. This is why you should vote for them. And as a field organizer, one thing I remember when I was like canvassing or trying to get volunteers for Jennifer is that a lot of people like just don't know how they can engage and aren't aware necessarily on how to access those pathways. And social media has made that like so much easier. Like you can Google like your local official, look up what their campaign is doing, sign up on their website to volunteer, and that is like a great way to be involved politically and know what's going on. So that's one thing. Another thing too, I mean, going back to like addressing the pandemic responses, I see a lot of communities setting up mutual aid funds. So again, kind of what Mishi was saying, it's like if you know your neighbor is struggling, it's like one, obviously contact your officials, your local and state officials, but then also organize mutual aid funds, because while they're there, it's like they're organized by the community to help address community needs. So I think those are like really good too. I mean, on social media these days, I see so many Venmos for cash bail, like for bail funds, for mutual aid funds to help your neighbors who don't have a job at the moment, like get groceries, pay rent, and all that stuff. And then, you know, there's like a lot of things you can do. I will say Virginia, we have a primary coming up on June 23rd. So I would say the best way to like plug in is find out who's running in each state, like in your district at the state level, local level, because it's not just about like your delegates. It's also about your county board, your school board, your city council. Like it's all that information is out there. One thing I will say, I think that up until social media came out, it's been really hard to access that information on purpose because a lot of those political spaces, especially in Virginia, are very much insulated. And I think that the more that people show up to town meetings, to town halls, and all that information is so much more accessible now through Twitter, through Instagram, through Facebook, whatever. I mean, there are Facebook events for like set up for most things, but you do have to go and find it, right? I will say in Virginia specifically, with all these issues coming ahead, we have a primary coming up. We have 2 Black women who have announced their governorship for this race, and I think that is incredibly important. One of them is Jennifer Carroll Fuller, my former boss. Jennifer McClellan is the other candidate who recently announced her nomination. I would say to everyone who's listening to this call, like, please go check their campaigns out. And again, as Mishi said, I thought what you said was perfect. Follow the money. You know, one thing too in Virginia that's a big issue is there's a monopoly over who controls our power. Electricity, Dominion Power right now controls like majority of who has access to power lines. Like, you know, if your power is going out during every storm, like ask, why is my power going out? Most of the time it's probably because who lives in your community. Mostly it's a lot of minority majority communities that have those issues. And Dominion grows that influence because of the money they give to all these candidates. And one thing about Virginia too is they don't have any fundraising limits. And so a lot of these corporations, a lot of these PACs get away with just donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to candidates, and that's how they end up staying in power. So, and social media has made all that information so much more accessible. Technology has made that information so much more accessible. Like there's a website called bpap.org, and that literally lists out all of the donations given to different candidates at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level for specifically Virginia. So, you know, all these things are accessible, but you do have to go find it. But I will say one downside, I think, of social media is how a lot of misinformation gets spread out. And so one thing too, I urge everyone to do is really stay critical, look at what you're reading, you know, don't just watch MSNBC and CNN all the time, like go out and figure out, you know, why are they covering this issue, not other issues? And then also, who is this narrative benefiting? Because most often it's benefiting people who already have a lot of privilege and people who don't need help, and very rarely do people who need help get that coverage, but social media has allowed those communities to start pushing out more and more, highlighting more of their issues. So
Oh, that's some good advice. Thank you so much, Suha. So moving on, Shaila, um, you're currently working in national security after your graduation from the College of William and Mary in 2014. And you have majored in government and Hispanic studies. Your current role is in communications and public affairs, and you also hold a master's in public administration from George Mason University. So Shaila, I know that during our recent talks, because we met up for the rehearsals, we met up online for the rehearsals, you talked about going to the protests. So because at this point, the protests across US and about the Black Lives Matter movement is gaining a lot of traction. So one major issue one major issue getting awareness is the role of the police and whether they should be reformed, defunded, or even abolished. I wanted to know what are you thinking about this? What are your thoughts on the future of policing in America?
First off, thanks for that introduction, and I want to say thank you to everyone who gave me this opportunity to talk about this. I'm going to talk about kind of a big topic in a couple of minutes, so happy to take follow-up questions. There's a lot to take in because, as we've seen with this groundswell of support for activism, people are questioning the role of police and law enforcement and politicians in our society more than I think ever before. I had never heard before a couple months ago the concept of defunding the police. That said, a lot of things are changing in front of our faces. In the first month since George Floyd's murder, there have been over 530 instances of police brutality against protesters documented via video and camera. That's just the ones we could capture. And the majority of those are against peaceful protesters. People kneeling in a field have been tear gassed, which is, banned in warfare under the Geneva Convention as a chemical weapon, but used on our streets against people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. Rubber bullets are another tactic that are being used on our streets, and at least 8 people, the majority of them journalists who are bystanders as part of the press, have lost their eyes and are now blind in one eye due to ruptures caused by rubber bullets. So there's really war zones opening up on our streets, and in the vast majority of cases, that brutality is incited by the police, unfortunately. There have been unlawful searches and seizures, and for the first time, we're seeing some punishment. It's just a handful. It's just a small fraction of these people who are abusing their power to protect and serve us. And so it's led a lot of us to ask, what are our options? This is a democracy, right? So where can we go from here? Do we leave it as is? I mean, we've had peaceful protests in the past. We've, organized, but how do we change things? I think we all can agree here that we cannot leave this as it is because those are our fellow Americans on the streets getting attacked. A lot of people have looked towards reform. And I think to people who are newer, opening their eyes to this discussion, reform sounds like such a palatable option, right? Why can't we just take this institution that we need and fix it? The problem is we have been trying for literal decades to move forward with reform. In fact, if you need some more recent examples, Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd, had actually completed reform training under the Obama-era Department of Justice. So de-escalation tactics, racial biases, social cues, all these things that should help us avoid a situation like what happened in Minneapolis. It didn't change anything. And while one or two anecdotes may not change, there are hundreds of examples if you dig deep. Rayshard Brooks, who was murdered recently at a Wendy's drive-in, that cop had finished de-escalation training a month prior. If you cannot de-escalate a man sleeping drunkenly in his car, what right do you have to use weapons against our own people, right? So reform, it shouldn't be a part of, it's not our whole goal here. That cannot be their entire strategy, because when you try something repeatedly and it doesn't work, it's time to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally have started advocating for the defunding of the police, and I understand, this slogan is tough for people, right? It can mean a lot of things. It means things to different people, and so it's hard to find traction on one movement to coalesce behind. And that's because this is just growing right now, right? This is the birth of a new idea, which is that
Some people think it means get rid of all police funding, which kind of ties into my next discussion on abolition. What it means to me and a lot of organizers is that the police have a budget that far outstrips almost any other community service in a city's government. One example is LA has a $10.5 billion budget. And how much do you think goes to the police? $3.2 billion. So the rest covers everything: healthcare, social services, mental health, any kind of community initiative, libraries, education. They're all squeezed in here on the bar graph, and here are the police. So if we talk about reallocating our priorities, that it's not just a matter of we're punishing the police. It's that we ask the police to do too much. We can't have a policeman come to a situation that requires a mental health expert and come bringing their gun, which often escalates the situation. We need to be funding mental health initiatives, funding social work, and other non-confrontational ways of handling situations instead of calling 911 for every interaction. Every time someone spots a Black man walking down the street looking suspicious, you can't just call the cops. It causes this paranoia, and community initiatives, being more highly funded, actively prevent crime. So if you think of the after-school programs that have been cut in low-income communities, those kids, they don't have anywhere to go after school. So where are they going to go? If they're on the street, they are ripe for gang recruitment, right?
Yep.
So, and Farhan, I'm so sorry. If you have any questions, please feel free to.
Sure, I will.
And
but I love listening what you're talking about.
Thank you. You know, it's I feel like there's so much to learn about it, but once you see it, you're like, wow, why are our libraries where kids could be getting educated after school and participating in robotics or, you know, all kinds of arts and crafts? Instead, you know, they don't have anywhere to go because we've pushed all our funding into one section of our community that it's not really doing that much good. I want to touch very briefly on abolishing the police. I personally think that we're not ready for anarchy, right? So some people abolish the police means get rid of people who are here right now in the police force and start over. Some people think it means we don't need any police force. And I think that that discussion is a little premature, to be honest. I think we first need to start looking at reducing the role of police in our community. And then where do we go from there? What results can we find from this experiment? And as you may have heard, due to the protests, many cities are starting to cave because the power of the people coming to the streets, right? Cut police funding. They don't need to be militarized more heavily than other countries' armies. They don't need rocket launchers. They don't need sonic grenades to deafen the people near them. They certainly don't need tear gas for peaceful protests. And when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you have rubber bullets, everything is a target. And we need to de-escalate, demilitarize, and that comes from defunding. I do think that this is going to be a tough sell, but we're making a lot of progress. And I think people will have questions about what happens if there are no cops or fewer cops or they have fewer resources. A question I get a lot as a woman is, what happens to sexual assault victims? What about rape? What about harassment? And unfortunately, I've found in my research and talking to people over the years, one expert in sexual assault and legal aid said that in 5 years, in hundreds of cases, the police had ended up helping maybe 2 or 3 times. In many other situations, victims of sexual assault are further traumatized, on the receiving end of skepticism, even accusations from within the police department that they are making it up, looking for attention. So you can see all the ways that this is not really furthering the conversation that we need to be having about issues like sexual assault or violent crime and victimhood in our society. That's not just more money towards the police is not helping us. Look at heavily policed areas. Has crime necessarily gone down? The stats don't really support that. So there's a lot more to talk about even here in my own city in DC. We don't have a particularly violent police force, but a couple of weeks ago, a local hero, Rahul Dubey, had a number of peaceful protesters safely ensconced in his home to protect them from the cops who were targeting them for breaking curfew. I passed out water bottles to these protesters as they passed a few blocks prior, completely peaceful, chanting, marching, and they were kettled in illegally by the police and were given sanctuary in this home, and the police tear gassed through the windows of a private home in DC, and now are pushing back against our calls for defunding. They say they don't even want to consider reform. calls for reform, they say mean that the city's abandoned them.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have this polarized, dynamic, you can't wave a wand and reform that.
Yep.
We need to be thinking bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to take questions. I want to hear from anyone else on the panel.
Yeah, I think Suha, she wants to add something to you. Yes, Suha.
Yeah. So the only thing I wanted to agree with everything Shyla said, and then also in Virginia specifically, I'm assuming most of our viewers are Virginia residents. One issue that is really big is that Virginia has the highest rate of incarceration for youths compared to the national rate. So one reason it's the school to prison pipeline, which is essentially as all of us, I'm sure we know, growing up in Virginia, there are cops in our schools, and most often these cops are targeting Black people, Black youths, youths of color and stuff, and a lot of children who have mental health issues and learning disabilities, and that is a huge problem because there's one story in Norfolk. It was this 12-year-old Black boy. He kicked a trash can because he was autistic. He was having a temper tantrum. Instead of trying to de-escalate the situation or calm him down, the police put him in handcuffs. He's a 12-year-old boy. He doesn't know what's happening. Put him in handcuffs, and then he had to show up in a courtroom for assaulting a police officer. Another case was there. I think it was also somewhere in Hampton Roads, Virginia, or Norfolk, Virginia. There was a kid who didn't have enough money for lunch, so he stole a carton of milk, and he got arrested for larceny, for petty larceny. And why is he ending up in our school system? And one way that folks in Virginia can address these issues is, again, writing to your officials, talking about telling them why are cops in schools, and just getting rid of SROs, which are school resource officers, from schools. So that is a very Virginia-specific issue that the General Assembly is going to have a special session late in August. That is a great thing to write to your representatives about. Make sure they address the school to prison pipeline and what they're doing to bring Virginia's level of incarceration amongst youth closer to the national level, if not at zero. So that's all I wanted to say.
Definitely. And they're not preventing mass shootings in schools, as we've seen. Coronavirus is the first thing that's really caused a downturn in that.
Yep. Also, I think, Mishu, you want to go ahead and say something?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Shyla and Suha were mentioning about the need for reform. What I just wanted to shed light on is the importance of two things. One, the language that we use. My brother's a law enforcement officer, so I also see both sides of this. I think the call for defunding the police, it is so important on all of us when we use that term defund to define what we mean by defund, because like Shyla was mentioning, defunding to some people can mean abolishing, right? And we don't want to live in a world of privatized neighborhood watches or polices, because that will simply exacerbate the systemic racism. So I think before we get into any of these conversations, whether it is with a friend or a group of people, it is so important to set the stage first with what do you mean by this word, but any word, whether it's defund or abolish or anything or reform, define that word, because it will tread very dangerous territory if you don't. I've talked to my brother at length about the types of things that he has to do as a police officer. And Shyla, to your point, police officers are beholden to needing to do a lot more than just protect your physical safety and security, right? They do a lot that we as private citizens don't hear about or don't need to worry about because they are there. And then the other comment I would make is going back to my first point of follow the money, right? Instead of this, right now defunding the police has become such a political thing, but can we flip that framework? Can we say, fine, defund the police is too political and it's too hot of a topic, but can we fund our schools? Can we fund our mental health problems and get involved in all of those town hall meetings? Because you will probably push more in an environment and get more done in an environment where it is not heated. So there are definitely going to be people who are all about police reform and they're experts in that field. But if you're not an expert in that field, I would say turn your attention to pushing for more money in the other arenas that we need right now.
I think that's a great point, which is why, I talking to someone, I hadn't originally planned to define reform, defund, abolish until I heard that that's actually going to be really helpful for people. At the same time, I'm not sure where I stand on the discussion yet, because we have not seen people cutting police funding until people were in the streets chanting to defund. So we'll have to just see what's most effective.
So, just a question here for all of you, actually, and it's open to all the panelists as well. So, I know that defund is basically about allocating resources to other places because they need it too, and they could do a better job if they have it. And also, Mishu, to your point, I hear that the police are expected to do much more than just protect the citizens of the country. I mean, so I was going through something that I read much earlier on, especially during the George Floyd's case, about how police training is a very, very necessary thing, and it just doesn't involve being a strong guy there, but it's more like the how strong you could be mentally prepared to handle something, and how important it is to have these mental health checkups with police, and of course these need resources again. So I'm just asking because I know that there are two ways to look at it. One is that you help these police become a member of the community first by giving them every bit of training and help they need first to get going, because I hear that with police what happens is, and it's also with the doctors, that when you cut the first time you feel horrible, when you cut the second time you feel less horrible, and then you just get used to that because you feel like this is okay to have. So I mean, between their job, they actually get trained to see the worst. But is that even so? I want to ask that, should we not distribute some of our resources to help give them that step where, no, you're still a human being, you're still a citizen first before you're a police, and that would require funding actually. And as opposed to that, I again agree with defunding because I feel like other areas also need that money. So I think it's a dilemma in my head. I haven't come across and stood somewhere and said this is what it is. But what do you guys think about that?
I do have a response, but I want to give someone else the chance to talk about it a little bit.
Well, so I want to say, one, I think we have to consider the historical context too when we talk about policing. It's not just about protection. It if you look at the historical context, police officers' mental health sure is very important, but I think that the people who are being targeted, so when you think about like Black Lives Matter, Black people who are being the subject of a lot of police brutality and police violence, I think that narrative around mental health of cops, you have to think about who's that benefiting. Ultimately, that argument is often used to increase funding for the police, which if we saw that I think that there's a lot of evidence showing that community reforms and body cameras and stuff aren't working in preventing police brutality. Just 4 years ago, Eric Garner in New York had the same thing happen to him. He died because he was choked out by a police officer. And even before that, there's so many other lives who have been lost because of the same exact reason that you're seeing videos right now. So I think the first thing too is to kind of reframe how we address defunding, because it's not just about protecting our communities. It's bigger than us. It's also protecting our Black neighbors, our Black community members. So I think that's just one thing that I want to underpin in this discussion, is that it's, we should center the people who are being most affected by police brutality, which is our Black people. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Suha.
I'd like to keep my response to under 30 seconds because I know I've gone over my time a little bit. There is immense amount of funding for training already in police budgets. Like I mentioned briefly with the Obama-era Department of Justice reforms that Derek Chauvin and the other murderers went through less than 5 years ago and go through regularly. It is not clicking, and it's not a matter of making the training more expensive or paying for more of it. They were taught how to de-escalate. They were taught how to overcome racial bias. In Oakland 2 weeks ago, a man who has taught community bias issues to the police. The Oakland police have paid this man for 3 years to come and teach their officers about de-escalating and how to work better with the community. He was shot with a rubber bullet in the genitals by a cop that he had trained. Point blank, he's now sterile and unable to have children, which was their plan for the next year. So if the people training the cops cannot get them, and it's not, a fault of the person that he wasn't a good enough teacher. It's the fact that when you weaponize these forces on our streets and you give them we could have a whole hour of discussion on qualified immunity. Why is it so hard to get cops held accountable for when they do attack innocent people? because of that, I am actually very strong against the idea of reserving money for training. They have more than some, countries' GDPs in their budgets over a couple of years, and the training is not working. So my feeling is that we can't get rid of training. And because of police unions, which are separate from the police chief, the police unions that really make it tough to cut into this relationship, I have watched segments on how even when a training from an external consultant was considered too violent, you look up warrior policing after this. That will show you how they teach people to dehumanize criminals, especially Black people, criminals, suspects. The police banned it in Minnesota. The police union encouraged cops to watch it in their spare time so they would know how to more effectively kill people. So it's so much bigger than just training. There has to be an entire shift in what we allow them to do. So that's just my piece on that.
Yeah, completely agreed. And thank you so much. Thank you. I mean, this has been very enlightening and eye-opener, and I'm so glad we're all talking about this issue today. So thank you all for sharing. I have taken a good deal of time. I want to pass it to Zarafsha now. And of course, we have a second part of the segment still going. So viewers, please do not go anywhere yet. We still have an open-end discussion that's going to take place in a few moments, and Zarafsha will be leading it. So thank you again, to talk with me, and I'm so glad that we are all talking about this today. We should talk about this more, actually. Thank you. Zarafsha, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's really important to have these engaging conversations, and you guys have given such thoughtful answers. And like one of you mentioned, there's just we could talk about this for a really long time. There's just so much to talk about. And this show today, we kind of wanted to take out a few of the burning questions that that is in the public consciousness right now, because I think it's such a tumultuous time and everything is so uncertain. So I think it's important to take some time to reflect and actually process what's going on. So thank you everyone for contributing to the discussion. Now we're gonna take a moment to Zareen is gonna present something that she has. It's a bookstagram, which is, I think, an important thing to think about right now. I think education and getting yourself informed is very important in whatever ways, through nonfiction books, articles, or documentaries, movies, whatever way. I think it's important to stay informed in whatever way that you can. And so one way that Zareen is going to share is through literature. And you can explain what your bookstagram is and what you do.
Thank you. So I have a little book blog called Suba Reads. It's where I review and recommend books by authors of color. And because yesterday was June 19th, also known as Juneteenth, I'd like to share a book that I highly recommend. It has to do with Black history. It's this book called Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. And it's a book about two sisters in the 17th century in Ghana. One sister gets captured and sold into the Atlantic slave trade, while the other sister stays back in Ghana. And the book showcases different lived experience in both the US and Ghana. And each chapter is each descendant's short story. So whether it's in America going through slavery, Civil War, Jim Crow laws, and then on the other aspect, you have tribal wars in Ghana, tribal wars, British imperialism, and the reluctant participation in the slave trade. And although this is a fiction novel, I still think that I highly suggest it. And because I'm also an avid believer that through fiction, one can adequately record hopes, fears, joys, and sorrows of people and learn to sympathize, if not empathize. And that's it.
Oh, yeah. Shala, you've read this book, and do you want to?
Sorry. Yeah, I was so excited. When we had talked earlier, I didn't know this was the book that you were going to recommend. And this book, when I read it, it's one of the books that sits with you for a few days. You don't stop thinking about it once you close it the next couple of days, because when you're capturing this idea of intergenerational trauma and just how these chance encounters within a systemic issue can shift someone's life so much, escaping the slave patrol versus getting hauled onto the boat, and then your entire lineage of future changes. I thought it was really powerful, and I highly recommend it as well. I definitely second your recommendation.
No.
And I think it's super important, especially as maybe first or second generation South Asian Americans in this country. Like, we're fortunate to have our lineage. We're very fortunate to know our lineage. We have our parents to tell our lineage to us. The African American people in this country lost their lineage. It was literally cut off. They don't know anything. Like that, the lack of family ties is so important, and how that like impacts you as a person, impacts your lived experience in this country, all of that. And then also, like, I didn't really realize that police brutality has been a long-standing like issue in this country. In this book, you'll one of the characters, or I think multiple characters that live in America are they go through that, and you're actually reading in length and in detail. Like, the author does not sugarcoat it. And I think that was really important to like showcase.
No, definitely. And I think we mentioned at the very beginning, the uncle mentioned that, you know, we have this rich history that we're connected to, and we know this, and we, you know, connect to it directly. And that does, you know, as you said, make us who we are today. And a lot of African Americans in this country just don't have that connection. And that is very, you know, unfortunate. And I think it's also important to read. I think it's incredible that your blog specifically focuses on like authors of color, because, you know, it's important to like read about different kinds of people, but it's important especially to read about them from like the people that experience it. I think that's something to keep in mind. So thank you. And I think everyone, if you can go, if you're like interested, please follow Zareen's blog. I think it's on an Instagram page. Do you want to share the name again so people can get it?
It's called Suba Reads.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And I think it's also incredible to have someone else, you know, recommend things for you. I know I like, you know, seeing other people like that I know read something and you know, have a review for it and share that. So thank you. So now we're going to move into like the question and answer section, which is basically sometimes the audience has questions that they've come up with during the discussion. And so if while we're having this discussion to the audience, please feel free to keep asking questions and I'll do my best to answer them. So first, I think I want to start off with asking a question about just, I know the elections are coming up and we talk a lot about participation, you know, in different forms of calling your representatives or being out in the streets and kind of engaging with the political environment, not just like discussing it, you know, you want to be actually impacting it. So I want to ask, a lot of people right now are kind of dissatisfied by like the options that we have. And a lot of people feel like, oh, why should I even bother voting when like I don't like any of the options? Like they're both like, especially I think a lot of people are dissatisfied by the two-party system because it doesn't seem like a very distinct, they don't seem very distinct, and especially in light of like whether or not the allegations against Joe Biden are true or not, it is kind of feels like you're kind of picking the same like candidate. So what does that, to those people who have this dissatisfaction, what do you say? Should you still vote? Should you still participate in the system, even if it doesn't feel like it's like the best system right now? And I'm going to take a moment to turn on my light, but please keep answering questions.
I can start responding to that. What I would say to it is, well, first of all, I have a book recommendation about that. Nelson Mandela's book, A Long Walk to Freedom. It is long and it is dense, but it really shows you the power of the creation of a political party, which is not easy. So that would be my first plug to like learn a little bit more. And my response to that would actually be, again, like power is not something that someone will hand you. So not voting and saying the government sucks and isn't doing right by me, like that is on you 100%. People have fought for us like for the right to vote, people of color, women, right? Like we are standing on shoulders and people have died for these rights. So to not vote, I think that you're coming from a place of privilege to say, well, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to vote. People died for that right. Like go and do it. That's inexcusable. And so like I have very strong feelings about the exercising the right to vote. And then, like I said, power is not something that someone will come to you and say, hey, you look underrepresented, I'm going to give you power, right? Power is something that is earned and taken. So if you're not doing it, again, resting and leaning back and saying the government is broken, so I'm not going to participate, like that's your responsibility. Then you have to reap the consequences, and that's where we're at right now in the US.
I also think saying I won't participate comes from a place of privilege, because then it means that whatever either person that's chosen does, it doesn't affect you, but it will certainly affect someone else. I personally am not happy with our options, but I'm less happy with one option, and I believe in the concept of harm reduction. So even if one candidate who I hate on 10 topics versus one candidate I hate on 8 topics, I'm going to pick the person who at least on 2 things I agree with. However, I don't think you can have that without the idea that you need to push the people chosen to support you, to represent you, a little further. So this is especially poignant with this election coming up. I've heard people say, you know, don't mention anything negative, just side with this person and then we'll get there. But once someone is in the White House, how do you then affect their policy? When is the time that we can say, okay, we'll support you, but it's our support, it's maybe not conditional, but it really is important to us that you listen to us on these topics. So I think it's really critical not to just put your head down and say, all right, my vote's in, whatever happens, happens. I think we, rather than being too blindly loyal, we should question even the people that we're selecting for ourselves and always push them to be better. Otherwise, we don't have any power, really. We only have the ballot box, and so much more than just that. But that's where it starts.
I want to say, so interestingly enough, I actually, I don't disagree. I agree with everything Mishu and Shyla said. I will say that I think I can understand why people don't feel like they can vote for Joe Biden with the allegations coming up. I think that one thing to say is that voting is not enough, never should it be enough. You need to be engaged at the local level. You need to be attending town hall meetings. You need to be attending school study meetings. You need to be involved in your child's PTA and see what is going on, because that is where, again, as everyone has said here, is the most impact is happening. Like just voting for the president is not enough. Just voting for your federal officials is not enough and never enough. So I urge everyone listening, like don't just stop at voting. Make sure that you know who all of your candidates are. I think primaries, like people who are unhappy with the 2-party system, totally understand, but that's where primaries come in. Primaries are the time to really make sure you are nudging your local officials. I will say right now, Jerry Connolly has a primary opponent. Her name is Zainab Mohseni. And since I work for the D-Trip, I am not endorsing either one, but I will say that is an option to look into if you are not happy with what Jerry Connolly is doing. But Jerry Connolly represents like a lot of Fairfax County, parts of Loudoun County, so we'll definitely check to see if he's your representative. But she is a young woman. She is a refugee from Afghanistan, so, you know, I would urge you, like, don't just stop at presidential voting. Like, your local officials are much more, if not like the most important. You know, that's why it's really important on November 8th, even if you don't vote, like, even if you don't like Joe Biden, even if you don't vote for Joe Biden, make sure you are filling out everyone else on that ballot. So
just to add to that point, the president also has a lot of power in picking the cabinet members. So that's another reason to vote. Yeah, that's pretty much all of it.
And I just wanted to build off what Sue has said and follow up. And, you know, there's a lot of individuals who don't have the ability to be more involved in politics, whether it's a mom working 3 jobs and doesn't have the ability to be a part of her child's PTA, or those who suffer from healthcare issues. So going off what Mishu said earlier in our show, it's so important to listen to your neighbors and to contact our local officials on behalf of our neighbors, on behalf of what the rest of our community is experiencing, for those who are unable to share their voice themselves.
This is particularly resonant after what happened in Georgia with voting, where people waited up to 8 hours to express their right to vote because there's voters. You know, it's easy to tell people to go vote. We also have to attack the systems that are deliberately preventing minorities in particular from being able to vote. And definitely we have the ability, you know, I can take the day off if I need to, even though election day is not a holiday. Not everyone in the working class can't. So definitely voting for your neighbor, not just yourself.
One thing I also want to add is that if anyone is actually interested in getting more involved, not just with elections, but there's a lot of groups in Virginia too who are doing like this work around DACA, around like trying to get police out of schools. So some of them are La Colectiva, Surge, which is called Showing Up for Racial Justice in Virginia. All these groups. There's a lot of groups in Virginia, but unfortunately, there's just not the infrastructure needed. So when Amazon was first moving into Virginia, Virginia gave Amazon a ridiculous tax account. There were a lot of folks who showed up, working class folks who took the time to show up on Saturday mornings to try to like push back against what a lot of like localities were doing, specifically Arlington County, and giving Amazon such a big tax break. So again, it doesn't just have to be with your elected official. There's also a lot of outside groups in Virginia who are already doing the work, and they just like need more people to show up. So I would definitely urge people to look into those groups as well.
No. Yeah, you guys bring up really incredible points. I think one of them is, you know, the ability to vote and voter suppression. And so before we go into the question that Sadia has presented, I want to ask like one of the bigger, I mean, I guess not everyone even like knows about this, but once you become like a felon, I think you lose the right to vote. Like you don't have the ability to vote. And so, you know, just even not even just like having like practical circumstances preventing you from vote, you can't, like, you just literally, you can't vote. And is that, what do you guys think about that? Is that like, yeah.
Actually, in Virginia, in Virginia, at least recently under Terry McAuliffe, they actually changed that. So Virginia felons, depending on what your charges were, if you look into it, you do have the ability to re-register and stuff. So that's another thing too. When I was field organizing, a lot of people just didn't know that because again, that information is not necessarily publicized, because that would mean a lot of people do not get voted in.
Sue had a great answer. I want to add on to even just the part of the question. Not only can felons not vote, in many, I think pretty much every district, their population counts towards the representation. Even so, they can't vote, but if they are in a rural area or a area where pretty much all the minorities are inside the prison and the city is predominantly not minorities, they give those people more voting power, even though they do not get to vote themselves, which is a huge miscarriage of justice. But it's also an incentive for people, you know, we could talk for hours about the private prison industry, but it's an incentive to incarcerate people because it basically gives you voting power without having to deal with the consequence of their votes. And that's a very painful reality that needs to be changed. And I'm not sure how yet, but I hope we start having that discussion.
Yeah, definitely. I there's just like every time someone says something, I'm like, I have like a follow-up question. So this discussion really could go on forever. So I want to take the question that Sadia had, you know, to the audience. How do the panelists feel about the bipartisan nature of U.S. politics that, you know, affects our community, DESI community? We have generally historically voted Democratic as Democrats most often, but are we being critical enough as a community? I think someone mentioned that, you know, you always have to, even after you vote, you have to keep pushing the candidate that you vote to implement, you know, the things that you voted for them. And so what do you guys think about that?
I think that it's good. It's good that this votes Democrat. I will say one thing that I have found increasingly that I think is really important to address, especially when talking about the DESI community, is talking about anti-Blackness and how that also plays into our politics. I remember when Obama was running in 2008, 2012, I definitely heard a lot of insensitive comments made about him amongst our community. And even now, when we're talking about policing, that is something to consider too. Like when you're thinking about like, why do you think we need, or why do you want increased police presence in your neighborhood? Like, is it because you want to keep quote unquote like bad people out of your neighborhood? Think about who are those bad people you're talking about. Who are those bad people that you're negating with, because in all the media we see, it is just dehumanizing a lot of Black people. And I think that's something the issue community especially has to reckon with. We have a huge anti-Blackness problem, a huge colorism problem. So.
Yeah, and like Shaila and Soha said prior, like it's not just voting in November, like stay involved with the issues. So join advocacy groups. There are so many rights to fight for, whether it's immigration or prison reform, criminal justice reform, like get involved with one of the issues. There will always be somebody fighting for those issues. Join a group that you care about, like, and don't feel the need to spread yourself thin, because personal mental health is also important. So you don't have to fight for every single issue all at once. Say that like this election cycle, half of it I'm going to spend on voter suppression, the other half I'm going to spend on mental health funding, right? And then get involved with those two issues, 2-year chunks at a time. And that's how we move the like needle forward, right? We're never going to achieve perfect in one election cycle. So to say like, I'm just going to be grumpy and sit out, again, that's you're coming from a place of privilege.
No, exactly. I think it's like you have to be caring and, being conscious of like the political climate all the time. You can't just pick and choose when, because that does come from a place of privilege. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I would like to say that it's become more important than ever, because I think I have watched. I'm not very new to. Sorry, I'm actually pretty new to American politics, for that matter. But what I've seen is that over the years, the tone of American politics has become way more outrageous in a way, because you precisely point people, you point communities. When the election was happening in 2016, and I just remember that it was appalling to hear that how two parties were fighting, and they were fighting about communities. I mean, I haven't heard that before. There was probably that was the underlying thing, but they were not fighting about it as openly as they did in 2016. And I think just being part of one of those communities kind of creates that fear within you that, can I just be in the same America again? Or am I living in the place where, I'm not looked at with a different perspective? So just putting it that way, it really impacted me in 2016. And I had just come in US then. So I wasn't even sure if I wanted to stay back here. But over time, I noticed that it's not as bad. There are people who understand better than just what's happening or what's being delivered as speeches on the media. So yes, you're right. We have the privilege, but it's so necessary to be aware that I can be a minority, but I can still do better. This is not it what these guys are saying, and so that's why we need to be more vocal about our communities than before.
No, yeah, definitely. I think what you said about, like, it does feel like America's coming to like a boiling point. And I think, as to segue into this question, it does feel like this is something that, it may feel like you can't do something about it, but you can, as a lot of these panelists mentioned, that even though it probably will be like putting in the hard work to educate yourself and be informed, and also, join groups and, attend your like community hall meetings and participate in that community. That's what's going to be important. And I feel like even though people are getting outraged, they're not putting in the work behind that outrage, if that makes sense. So voting participation, for the longest time has been an issue, especially among the younger generation. So what do you guys suggest to encourage more voting participation among the younger generation, among your peers and your friends? Anyone can take that question.
This is one where I am in a bubble in DC. Everyone here wants to vote, and our vote doesn't even count for as much. So it's, I think I need to expand my horizons and think about, do I know people that aren't voting? Some of us self-select. As a poli-sci person, it's like all my friends vote, right? Mm-hmm. But thinking more broadly, and I think someone else, maybe even Mishu in particular, has an example with like just using the digital nature of the platforms we have now to make things more accessible. People don't want to go wait for a couple hours necessarily, but like I just requested an absentee ballot online for the rest of the year because I don't know what's going to happen with coronavirus. Mm-hmm. People might not know that that's an option. So as much as we post about like brunch and concerts, and, well, pre-quarantine on social media, can we also be posting about these options that people have to facilitate voting? You know, I think it's worth going through a couple hours waiting to vote, but you can't make everyone feel that way. So the best thing I think is just how do we make the process easier and more accessible for people? And I think that will get a lot of people with inertia able to vote if they know they can just do it from their couch and drop it into their mailbox.
I think also with the younger generation, it has to hit home. After the Parkland shooting in 2018, we saw students protesting across the nation at schools, asking and demanding policy change for gun laws. So I think it's important for students and parents to talk to their children and have open conversations about, this affects you, even before something hits home. Like, we are all affected. Everything is interconnected. When kids feel, when they're, with the younger generation, they are directly involved in something, and when they feel that they're affected by something, they're obviously more inclined to partake. But for those of us that don't experience traumatic events or don't experience A, B, or C, I think it's important to keep building on those conversations and to really stress the importance of our involvement and our activism, because our voices need to be heard and shared in one way or another.
I will also add, I think voting is really important, but also moving out of this framework of voting in Minnesota, like, it was all of the organizers and activists who really got together on the ground, who have been doing this work for like a long time, from Black Visions Collective, from the Minnesota Freedom Fund, who got their city council to divest from the police. So again, I would really urge people, it's not just about voting. It's also like I see a lot of more increased participation from youth, participating in these protests, participating in like signing like, petitions and like writing to their like county officials. So I don't necessarily like, I actually have a lot of hope for the youth. I think it's really great. Like, everything we've been seeing, I'm really optimistic. I don't necessarily think that will be an issue in the future, because clearly things are getting done, and things are getting done because of youth activists on the ground, personally.
There was a question that came in about like, how do you encourage the younger generation to go and vote? And like, I think some of the ideas were posting it on social media where like our peers see that we're voting and engaged. Even leading up to voting, again, it's not just about the day of voting, like knowing your candidates and what they stand for is one thing. And then the other thing, like, make everybody's first time that they vote, like, this is for the parents in the room, right? Like, make everybody's first time that they vote when they turn 18, like a special event, right? If you can sit in a chair, like, all of us have taken the SATs that grew up here. None of our parents gave the option to not take the SATs. So if you can sit in a chair for 4 hours and take a boring ass test, like, you can stand in line and hang out with your friends for 4 hours and chit chat while you wait to vote, right? Like, again, I'm a little bit jaded about people not exercising their right to vote. But I think like there are definitely ways that you can like encourage it and make it a fun activity, or bring your kids along before they're even eligible to vote, right? Like, I know when I turned 18, I wasn't going to buy a lottery ticket, or I wasn't going to go buy cigarettes, because those were the things I could do. The only like 18-year-old option that I had to exercise was to go vote. So it was fun for me.
That's something.
Yeah, the role of parents, I think, is something I hadn't thought about before. A lot of panelists brought it up. I've taken it for granted. Maybe I'm so grateful that my parents have always been open to political discussions, exercise their right to vote, and to me, it was somewhat passed down. But yeah, we can actually, the idea of making it a special occasion, like encouraging it as a thing that you should do in Europe, not like, yeah, I went by and voted after work, and then the discussion's over. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I think just like encouraging, having that kind of encouragement and that kind of like positive feedback from your like family, your friends, and that community that you surround yourself in. Because I think it is important always to keep everyone around you, even if you don't have to get like heated about it, but you should be keeping it, on some front of your mind. And I think that's very important. And something else that you guys mentioned is like expanding the bubble and kind of having these conversations, not just with like people who kind of echo back your sentiments, having, you know, this perpetrating this idea of like participating and like how important it is, and how, you know, it's not just about always just about voting. It's not just always about being like angry about something. It's about, you know, supporting your community, supporting your neighbors. And I think that it should be something a little more, I think something a lot more people should engage in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be fun, but I don't think everything you do should have to be fun, because it's important. So yeah, thank you to the panelists for this incredible discussion. You guys have contributed like really insightful comments, and I hope the audience watching has, you know, taken this in, and I'm really grateful to have this platform, to have this discussion, and I know we could probably keep going and keep asking questions. So thank you everyone for sharing and being here. Now we're gonna transition to the last part of the show. And so Aditi has something to share. It's a dance video, and like she has something to share about that. And I think we've talked a lot about like the importance of culture on the show as well, and talking about politics. And I think those two can sometimes be interrelated. So Aditi, if you wanna start sharing about why it's important.
Yeah, thank you, Zafsha. So I have a choreography business with my partner, Anika Mahmood, and you know, essentially tying this to our discussion, it's so important as South Asians in America to have platforms for us to represent our culture and for us to share our voice in different ways, through arts, through politics, whatever it may be, whatever we're passionate about. So I'm happy to share these next two videos with you. It's something that my partner and we worked on, and you know, the purpose of this is to also show how we as South Asians are capable of producing quality work in multiple different sectors and fields, and as well as how important it is to use our platforms to reach out to our networks and to spread awareness of different things going on and different things that affect our community, such as colorism within the Desi community and the South Asian community, and to continue spreading knowledge and sharing the beautiful work that we do and the things that we love. So I hope you guys enjoy. It's the first video is like a dance video that we recorded and edited, and the second one is kind of like a highlight video showing the multiple things that our company has done until this point.
Sage. दिल की धड़कन से तो आए जाना, हमारे सब के हो जाए आना। कभी कभी तो हमसे घबराना, सभी को तुम ही समझ आना। अभी तो हमने ही जाना। तू कायना 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 लोरी सुनाना। कर चले कर श्वेत पवन का चले नील गगन को चले नील गगन को उड़ कर चले कर श्वेत पवन का चले नील गगन को चले नील गगन को
Thank you so much. That was incredible, both the videos. And I think a lot of people are saying that this is like such a wonderful way to like wrap up. And I think right now it's a hard time to feel connected to like anyone at all, especially your culture. So that was very incredible montage to bring that back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. So what an amazing show, and what a great thoughtful discussion. So again, as I say every time, this brings us hope, and it's just a matter of time when we'll be over with all this, coronavirus affected communities, and things are moving to the right direction, and you guys are all voting, I can tell, and that actually inspires me and my kids and everybody else as well as a community. So thank you again. And like I say every week, next week, actually, we're going to have another topic. We haven't decided yet which one would be. It could be either, like a bullying problem in our high school or middle school community, or we can talk about LGBT community, which are very effective in this day and age. And don't go yet. We're going to end this session with a little, slideshow for another 60 seconds or so. And thank you again for staying put. And I really, really appreciate each and every one of you. What a thoughtful, and you are the true leaders. Seriously, I say that every time. We have enough soldiers. We need more leaders, and I have no doubt that our community is full of great leaders, and we're moving to the right direction. So with that, thank you again. Have a great weekend. We'll see you all next Saturday, right at 12 noon Eastern. And until then, goodbye, and thank you again. Take care.
See ya. Thank you.